Shalom Havreim, James Trim here, and today I want to talk to you about rational thought and the Torah and rational thought and the failure of the Yeshiva system. And let me just begin with Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Genesis 2:7 says, "And Yahweh Elohim formed Yetzer, man, of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul," or nephesh. The word for when it says "and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life" is nishmat. So the what Elohim breathed into man was his neshama. Um, that's a very significant word, so I want to explore that a little bit. Before we get going too far here, though, I do want to encourage you to financially support this work. We need your support financially. You are the ones that make this possible. And this time of year, at the time at least of the making of this video, this time of year is commonly donations are low. And this month has been no exception. And we are in a dire situation right now where we need to raise $500 by the end of the day today in order to clear our account tonight and prevent um, bills from bouncing and a catastrophic cascade effect of returned items and fees. So please consider supporting this work. The You can donate by PayPal to donations at wnae.org, or you can click on the link for donations in the video description. Also, remember to like and subscribe to these video teachings. So, we're talking about Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, starting out. And this is the passage that tells us that Elohim breathed the neshama, or gave man a neshama. Now, in Hebraic thought, there are three intangible parts of a man, if you will. In Greek thought, there's the spirit and the soul, but and we have that paralleled in English. But in Hebrew, there's the spirit, the ruach, the soul, the nephesh, and the neshama, which doesn't translate easily into English. But we're going to explore what that is here. Targum unclose to this passage in the Aramaic. The Targums are Aramaic paraphrases that were read with the texts, which were paraphrased, so they often explained what the ancients understood the passages to mean. So the Targum unclose to this passage says, "And Yahweh Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul that speaks." This is also the reading of the Sefer HaYashar, the book of Jasher, chapter 1, verse 2. So the second verse of that book has almost an identical reading in Hebrew, though, instead of Aramaic. So, Rabbi Nachman, in his very authoritative commentary on the Torah, in speaking of this verse, he says, but he refers to Unclose, to the Unclose Targum. And he says, but the translation of Unclose, that the man became a speaking being, shows that he thinks that the Nephesh, or more correctly, the Neshama, blown into the man's nostrils here was the rational soul. Various rabbinic stories also point in this direction, he says. If that is correct, forming man in the first half of the verse would have to include animation and the sense of perception. That is, the nephesh, as it apparently does for animals in verse 19. In that case, the infusion of the neshoma would indeed be the rational soul. Um, in fact, if we look at verse 19 and compare it, we'll see that the difference between a man and an animal is this neshoma. Um, there's a lot more that I could explore about Genesis 2:7 and the neshoma in terms of free will and the two inclinations, etc. However, I don't want to the I want to kind of stick with the subject that we're covering here, which has to do with the rational mind. By the way, the Tanya also applies Genesis 2:7 in a very similar way here. And in the Tanya, the uh, um, uh, the uh, rational mind is associated with the divine soul, which is we'll get into more as we go along here. Philo of Alexandria, I'm not going to read everything that Philo said, but Philo associated this neshoma with the mind, and his allegorical interpretation 3:161, who is the heir of divine things, 56, and on dreams 1:34. He in all three of those passages he makes this identification. But what's really key is what he says in Life of Moses 1. There's Life of Moses 1, Life of Moses 2. Life of Moses 1, um, uh, 26. He says, "For these passions," talking about the emotions, "are the causes of all good and of all evil, of good when they submit to the authority of dominant reason, and evil when they break out of bonds and scorn all government and restraint." By government here, it doesn't mean like government that you learn in government class. It means the ability to govern your actions and your emotions. Um, Similarly, 4th Maccabees chapter 2, verses 21 through 23 says, "And Elohim fashioned man, he planted in him emotions. When Elohim fashioned man, he planted in him emotions and inclinations. But at the same time, he enthroned the mind among the senses as a sacred governor over them all. To the mind he gave the Torah, and one who lives subject to this will rule a kingdom that is temperate, just, good, and courageous." So we have here universally, virtually universally, from multiple sources, from the Tanya, from Philo, from Rabbi Nachman, um, the idea that in Genesis 2:7, Elohim infused man with a rational mind. Um, this is very important. Now, the Tanya goes on to give a nice explanation of this in the idea that when the Torah then, because we said our last citation we looked at was in 4th Maccabees 2:21 through 23, which says that to the mind he gave the Torah. And the Tanya goes into a lengthy description of this whole process, whereby the wisdom of the Torah enters into the understanding of man, much like a seed enters into a womb. The male seed enters into the female womb, and then gestates in our understanding and gives this gestation and this whole process is a knowledge of Torah. Um, and so this is why the word know Dot is used in Hebrew as a euphemism for the sexual act. For example, Adam knew Chava. Okay. Because this is an allegory for the way in which the wisdom of Elohim enters into our understanding, and then through that knowledge of Torah gives birth to a feelings about Elohim, whereas on the one hand we love Elohim and want to keep the positive commandments, and we have a healthy fear and respect for Elohim that causes us to not want to violate the negative commandments. This is the teaching of the Tanya, which was the foundational work for Chabad, and was written by the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe Zalman, to give a um, intellectual basis for Hasidism. At the time, there was this um, feeling by non-Hasidic Jews, by opponents to Hasidic Judaism, that Hasidism was um, um, just a bunch of emotional hype. And so the Rebbe Zalman wrote the Tanya to give an intellectual basis for Hasidism. And it's very important because it's a rational basis for Hasidism. It has to do with the Torah being infused in the rational mind and processed in the rational mind. The rational mind is essential and is key, and that's why we're talking about this today. Now, there is a problem in rabbinic Judaism today in the yeshiva system, and that problem is that younger students who enter into the yeshiva system in the early years of yeshiva, um, uh, high school age, when they're studying the Gemara, they are trained and encouraged to question everything. They're broken up into study partners where one partner will take one position and the other will take the other position in the Gemara, and they will debate and discuss the positions. This is very important because it's all centered on critical thinking, on rational thinking. Very, very important. A student is taught in the Haredi Yeshivot. They're taught, and as they're studying Gemara, that they must separate their mind from what the halacha is, what they were brought up to practice, uh, uh, because they're studying the Amorim and the Tanim in a time in which halacha was still fluid, and they are therefore they need to put themselves in the position of these sages in the Gemara and the Talmud that are debating, and they need to be able to put themselves in the position of believing, for argument's sake, of at least entertaining the thought that a position that turns out not to be the halacha in rabbinic Judaism is potentially the correct position, in the sense that they need to be able to understand the reasoning for that position and the repercussions of that position. They really need to understand that position and be able to put themselves in place of uh, thinking that position out as to its reasoning and its repercussions. And if they don't and can't do that, then they can't move on until they do. They need to really understand why Rabbi X held a certain position, even if that position, and what the repercussions of that position are, even if that's not the accepted position. This is very good, and this is one of the things that Gemara is really good at. There's some of it in Mishnah too, by the way, that often gets overlooked. But this is one of the great values of studying the Gemara, being able to critically approach the Torah. And look, as I've said before, there are two kinds of Torah. There's written Torah and oral Torah. And the uh, oral Torah, there are two types of oral Torah. There's oral Torah from Sinai, like the water libation ceremony, for example, um, or the travel distance on Shabbat. And those things aren't up for debate. But there are other elements which are the rulings of the Sanhedrin, the rulings of the sages, which come after that, um, and which are not necessarily from Sinai. There is a school of thought that says they're a rediscovery of Torah from Sinai, but that's not universally agreed. And those are things that we should be free to question. But here's the problem. Once the students move on from studying Gemara into their higher up studies in the rabbinic yeshivot system, and they start studying the great halakhic codifications, all of that ends, and they're not allowed to question. And a lot of bright yeshiva students that enjoyed studying the Gemara and appreciated and understood the Gemara, and then they graduate from studying Gemara and they move on to studying the halakhic codifications, and suddenly the rules have changed and they're not allowed to question anything. And in fact, they may get severe repercussions or scoldings, or becomes very problematic for them to question anything. They're not allowed to think anymore. And this is a fundamental problem because it should definitely be built on rational thought. Judaism was intended to be rational. Yes, there's a mystical component, and by mystical I mean non rational, the idea that Elohim communicates with man directly, with prophets, etc. But that is not the same, that is also an aspect. But there's also a very rational aspect to Judaism, or should be. And that rational aspect is what's taking place in the Gemara, in these debates, and something that needs to be appreciated. In fact, in the Talmud, Ben Zoma in Tractate of Vote 4:1, Ben Zoma says, "Who is wise?" He poses the question, the almost rhetorical question, "Who is wise?" I say it's not rhetorical because he answers it. He who can learn from any man, as it's stated in Psalm 119:9. From all my teachers have I grown wise. This is critical thinking, the ability to learn from anyone. Um, if um, if the person is wrong, then at least they make you think about why they are wrong and why the position that you're holding is right. But at least you're now it's rational. You're thinking it through and thinking about it. Um, Rabbi Jonah, in his commentary to this passage, actually of a vote, he says this may be compared to a man who lost a small object. Will he not hunt for it everywhere? Um, in other words, consider everything. Hold fast to what is good, but consider everything. And the Rambam, he says in his introduction to the Shemona Parakim, he says, we must accept the truth from whatever source it comes. Again, this rational, critical thinking. Uh, In the Babylonian Talmud in Haggiga 15b, we read about Rabbi Meir. It says Rabbi Meir ate the date and threw away the seeds. He found a pomegranate, and partaking of the fruit, he rejected the rind. So, critical thinking and rational thought and being able to question things and to, as I've said before, our beliefs must be big enough to include all the facts, open enough to be tested, and flexible enough to change. This is foundational. Uh, well, it should be foundational. It's supposed to be foundational to rabbinic Judaism in what was the teaching of Ben Zoma, in the teaching of the Rambam, in the position of Rabbi Meir, or the practice of Rabbi Meir, of considering these things rationally. And this is something that's been lost amongst the Haredi. It is lost. Um, it has become lost to a certain extent through the codifications, although it didn't have to be. I mean, you can have these codifications and consider them. But when the codifications become Torah, Torah can't be questioned. Okay, that the Torah is the Torah. The halakha that goes beyond the Torah, um, and when I say Torah, I'm including the oral Torah from Sinai, but the halachic positions, they should be up for critical thought. Um, and this is part of the failing of of rabbinic Judaism today, the Haredi system today, and particularly the Haredi um, yeshiva system today. This is why a Netzarim yeshiva is needed that is rational. A rational yeshiva teaching system is needed, one that teaches critical thought. Our Judaism should be uh, uh, critical, open to critical thought, open to rational thinking. It should be an exercise in rational thought. We should not be concerned in a negative way. We should not be fearful of where the facts and logic will lead, because the facts and logic will never lead us into error. Okay. Um, so, what are some things then that are lacking in being taught in the rabbinic yeshivot today? In many of them, first of all, Tanakh. Tanakh gets taught to a certain extent to the school children, but on an adult level, the yeshivot concentrate on Gemara, 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 and they concentrate on the halakhic codifications, and the Tanakh gets studied in only in that Tanakh passages get cited in these materials, but that is not really the way Tanakh should be studied. Torah gets studied in rabbinic Judaism with the rabbinic commentaries, um, but Tanakh, even though there are rabbinic commentaries to Tanakh, um, there's not as much concentration on them. Rabbi Kahana, in his yeshiva, he made a point of reintroducing the teaching of Tanakh on an adult level in yeshiva. Um, Another thing that has been lost because there's so much modern information. Um, Information has become available to modern times that wasn't available in in the medieval times in the yeshiva system. For example, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have a great body of information about Essene Judaism. Now, I don't want to get into debate about whether the scroll authors were Essenes or not. We've covered that in past videos and in past blogs. And if you have questions about that, I can refer you to that information. But anyone that seriously studied this, I don't see how they can come to the conclusion, any other conclusion, but that the Dead Sea Scrolls were of Essene origin. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are not studied in the yeshivot. Orthodox rabbis are generally ignorant of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Um, Philo of Alexandria is also another example. Well, let me back up to the Dead Sea Scrolls again. Um, Another thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls is they introduce us to the idea that there was an Essene position. And that there were, in the first century, in the Second Temple era, there was Essene Judaism, Sadducean Judaism, and Pharisaic Judaism. Pharisaic Judaism was divided into multiple schools of thought, the two largest being the School of Hillel and the School of Shammai. And these schools were debating, and halacha was fluid and debatable in those days. Now, there were some hardened positions. I got to tell you, the Essenes were amongst the worst of feeling like everyone, they were sons of light and everyone else was sons of darkness. And uh, 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 that nobody else was really Jewish. It's kind of familiar today now from the Haredi perspective. But again, all of this is material that we should be subjecting to rational thought. We shouldn't be ignoring. Philo of Alexandria. Um, in the first century, in the Second Temple era, there were three major centers of Jewish thought. There was the Holy Land, okay, uh, Jerusalem, Judea, and up into Galilee, Tiberias, and that area. Okay, there was the homeland, okay, um, the birthplace of the Jerusalem Talmud. There was that Jewish community. There was also a very large Jewish community that lived in Babylon. Babylon, in this terminology, refers to the area which had been the area of the Babylonian captivity. Think modern Iraq in that sort of area. And in the first century, because when Ezra and Nehemiah came back, Zerubbabel and whatnot, uh, that was not nearly all the Jewish people returned to the Jewish homeland. The majority actually remained behind in Babylon, and Babylon was the largest Jewish community in the world until the 19th century. And then anti-Semitism got so bad in the Arab world that they left and came to Israel, came to the United States, and so on. And there's a very small Jewish population there now. But you've heard of Rabbi Kaduri. He actually immigrated to Israel from that community. That is the birthplace of the Babylonian Talmud. Okay. But there was also a group called Alexandrian Jews that lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and had a thriving community there. And they were Greek speaking, um, but they were Torah observant and uh, definitely seem to have had their own halacha, but they were Torah observant, strongly Torah observant, and Philo does write about the importance of observing Torah. They were also very deep in philosophy, and they were their community was destroyed in 116 CE by the Romans, and had that not happened, we might also have an Alexandrian Talmud. But they were destroyed. We do, however, have some of their works, and most particularly a large amount of the works of Philo of Alexandria. Now, Philo wrote in Greek, and uh, his works were largely forgotten in rabbinic Judaism and aren't referred to in the Talmud or by the sages, etc. But he was Jewish. They were Second Temple era Jews, and they take Philo takes a philosophical approach to the Tanakh. None of that material is studied in the yeshivot, and it should be. It's part of our Jewish heritage that has been forgotten. And so, one interesting thing about Philo is that he was a rationalist, and he lived in a time and place in which the surrounding Hellenistic population of uh, uh, Hellenistic Roman Egyptians um, viewed Judaism as irrational, as fairy tales. Um, and Philo of Alexandria writes a lot about approaching the this material in a rational manner, and at least to his mind, attempting to bring it into harmony with rational thought. So that makes it very interesting from one who's wanting to come from a similar time period, in that we live in a time in which many people look at Judaism as irrational, when in fact um, Judaism is intended to be supremely rational. Okay, and then of course the Ketuvim Netzarim, the writings of the Nazarenes, can't even be considered rationally, and this is unfortunate. And it is, I think, uh, one of the things that could be accomplished by competing with the Haredi and rabbinic yeshiva system with a serious Nazarene yeshiva would be um, uh, serious consideration of the messiahship of Yeshua and the writings of the Ketuvim Netzarim. What Not only the question of messianic prophecy and who the Messiah is could be rationally considered instead of simply dismissed, um, but also the wisdom of the authors of the Ketuvim Netzarim and the wisdom of Yeshua could be considered, understood rationally, in context of Second Temple era Judaism, in context of Philo, of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and of the rabbinic literature. Um, and all of this leads us to teaching of Yeshua, saying of Yeshua that Yeshua gave in the Gospel according to the Hebrews, which is now lost, but it was used by the ancient Nazarenes, the original Jewish believers in Yeshua, and we have fragments of it, we have quotations from it found in the writings of some of the so-called church fathers and in the margins of manuscripts here and there. And one of these is the following. Yeshua said, "He who seeks will not rest until he finds, and having found, he will be amazed, and having been amazed, he will reign, and having reigned, he will rest." This is why rational thought, we were given an neshama, so that we could uh, uh, engage in rational thought and critical thought, in questioning things. The Gemara is all about that process, but we have so much more that can now be contributed to that process. The Dead Sea Scrolls give us an Essene voice to that ancient debate process of rational thought. Philo of Alexandria gives us the Hellenist voice, not in negative sense, not the Hellenists that wanted to reject Torah. I'm talking about the Torah observant Hellenists like Stephen in Acts chapter 6 and Philo of Alexandria. Um, he gives that voice to be also considered. Um, so, so we need a, a rational approach to Torah and Tanakh, and a rational approach to Judaism. Um, Only then and in that context can um, ultimately the Haredi, the Orthodox, and rabbinic Jews in general um, have there is a respect for scholarship in these circles, and only then when we can bring together a rational discussion and a critical discussion of the facts, uh, then I believe that Orthodox Jews on that basis uh, could then really consider uh, the uh, uh, the idea of the messiahship of Yeshua, and that's something very, very important that we can contribute if we can do it. So please like this video, please share this video with others, and please subscribe, and please donate to support this work. I'd like to see us build this kind of yeshiva. I'd like your feedback in the comments and in the message boards that we operate and whatnot. Please let me know what you think. Okay. Until next time, this is James Trim. Oh, let me remind you how to donate. You can donate by PayPal to donations at wnae.org. That's PayPal to donations at wnae.org, or click on the link in the video description. Shalom, shalom.